Hi, my name is Bonnie, and I am a grateful member of Alanon, and I am really honored to be here, and I do want to thank the committee for asking me. Everyone I told in Southern California that I was going to Brownwood, they were very impressed, and that we would be asked to such a wonderful, special weekend. And everyone I spoke to raved about Brownwood like it was something so unique and so wonderful. And it's true. It is unique and wonderful, and I just feel so welcome. And weeks before, months have been going on, where every week we got a phone call from somebody, a letter from someone else, welcoming us, just so excited to see us here. And I feel right at home from the moment I was picked up at the airport. And I'm always at home at an Alanon meeting. It's the only place where I can really get a deep sigh and feel I am home, I'm okay. So thank you very much. The honor is mine to be here. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I came from an alcoholic home. My father had a little bar in Cleveland, and when I got to the program, I had a list of reasons of why I acted the way I acted. One of them was that I was from Cleveland. If you came from Cleveland, you'd have my problems too, Another one was I was raised Polish Catholic. My parents were very old world. And, Irish Catholic is fun, but Polish Catholic is just grim. There's just no fun in it. The Irish have a great way, but, and then I had those nuns that raised me, and they were just terrible. For years, somebody would just say Catholic to me, and I would just go off crazy. So I'm working on that still. But I gave you all the reasons why I acted the way I acted. It was always somebody else's fault. And, as I said, coming from an alcoholic home, nobody escapes the disease of alcoholism. If you think kids don't know what's going on, you are highly mistaken. I did not know really that it was alcoholism, but I knew there was a severe problem in my household. And at an early age, I started blaming the non-drinking, my mother. She would only get off his back if he had only married another woman, And alcoholism does progress. It progressed in our household. And my way of dealing with it, my escape, I was identifying with Yvonne earlier. She got into studies, and my escape became ballet class, became dance. And that became my world. And because at home, I spent as little time as I could at home. I did not want to know what was going on, what was happening. And at ballet class, I don't know if any of you have seen the movie or the play Chorus Line, but there's a wonderful song that says, everything is beautiful at the ballet. And that was my life. Everything was just fine at ballet class. I could build up the walls. You don't talk in ballet class. And I was very much afraid. I was always inadequate at schools. And, very much a loner, a stutterer. So for me to be up here talking is a miracle in itself. So that was my escape. And one night, my parents constantly had those fights in the middle of the night, and we were always off bailing him out of jail after he smashed up a car or whatever. And one night he came home, and it was just a really vicious fight, really vicious between them. And I, being the child, got in the middle and trying to pull them apart. And it was just awful. And that night, I made a vow to myself. And it's one of those vows that is so crystal clear in my memory. I remember where I was standing. I was in my mother's dining room. I remember what I was wearing. I remember everything about the moment. And I made this solemn vow to myself that I would never go out with or marry anybody who drank. I hated drinking. I hated alcoholism. I hated what it was doing to my family. And I knew I had to get out of there. I just knew I had. Now, being a little Polish Catholic girl from Cleveland, it's hard to escape. My mother had a nice little Polish Catholic boy all picked out for me. So dance again became my reason to leave. And I packed up my bags, and my mother gave me $50, and I moved off to New York. And when I packed up my bags, I thought I was leaving my problems behind me. They were my problem. If I could just get away from them, I would be fine. And little did I know, when I packed up my bags, I packed all my problems with me. Anyway, I got to New York, and I was terrified and excited at the same time. When I would get really afraid, not knowing anybody, not knowing what to do, where to go, I would call my mother, and she has this, Alanons get a shrill voice after a while. And she would just give me this, she always talks with such great anger. There's never any, everything is just angry. And she would tell me everything that was going on at home with my father, and I knew I couldn't go back. I had to stick it out there. I could not go back to that. And in one of the shows I got as a dancer, in walked this tall, charming Irishman, and they didn't make anything like him in Cleveland, I'll tell you. He was adorable. He was good-looking, and he was bright, and everybody loved him. He was the life of the party, and he was interested in me, this little Polish girl from Cleveland. And she's still there sometimes, even today, this little Polish girl. She's going away slowly. And you know what? He drank a little bit. And I don't know what happened to that vow that I remember today, but I just knew that life with me would be so wonderful, that I would love him so much and make everything okay, that the drinking would just take care of itself. And you know, alcoholism was not a problem in the beginning. As I said, Sean was the life of the party, and I could just hang on to his coattails, and I looked wonderful. I had this great guy on my arm, and it made me look good. Later on, you know, later as I got into the program, I really realized that I married my solution. I really wanted him to fix me, and I got very angry later on when the drinking progressed because he wasn't fixing me. He was making more problems, if anything. But anyway, so we got together, and we were having a wonderful time. You know, I drank, and we were in the theater, we were in New York, we were doing exciting things with exciting people, and it was more than I could possibly have dreamed of. And it was terrific. And as I said, his drinking was not a problem. Everybody drank. That's what you did in the theater. After the show, everybody just drinks. And later, Sean always said, I don't know what happened to my 10 martini, what the hell girl, but that was me. I mean, I could just down him, you know. And anyway, we got another show, and we came out to Los Angeles, and that became, what it really was a geographic. And we got married in Los Angeles, and I thought, okay, it's time, you know, we're now married, and let's settle down and become mature, responsible adults, a nice married couple. And what happened is I settled down, but he didn't, is what happened. And I noticed his drinking. And it became a problem. It became a real problem. And there's a wonderful Alanon Ramona who really explains it so well for me. She said, you know, if alcoholism had knocked on my door, April 5th, 1969, I would have known exactly what the problem was. But she said, that's not the way alcoholism happens, and it's not for me. What happens is it creeps under the cracks of the doors and through the cracks of the windows, and things started changing in our life. And I didn't know what it was. And I think that's perfect Al-Anon. I didn't know what the problem was, but I was going to fix it, you know. And that's what I strove to do for the next 5 years, to solve the problem. And I did everything I could. And, you know, for me, insanity is when I start believing a practicing alcoholic, I'm in trouble. And I started believing him. I wanted him to make it okay, you know. And I was identifying so much with Yvonne's story because she said if she only lived in Malibu, the smog made her drink. Well, we had those kind of crazy things too. Sean, being Irish, said if he only owned a piece of the soil, a piece of the land, you know, he wouldn't have to drink. So we bought this awful house in the Hollywood Hills. And it really wasn't even on a street, it was on a trail. It was surrounded by redwood trees. Sean said he never hid his drinking, he just hid the house in which he drank in, and that's true. You couldn't find it. It was dark. It looked adorable on the outside, but it had no heat, no foundation. It was on a 3-foot cesspool. It was a mess, and it was becoming what our relationship was becoming. We looked great on the outside. People used to call us the Campbell Soup Kids. We looked cute and adorable, and we had this wonderful marriage working, so they thought. And things started getting crazy. And you know, it's not, Sean's not the kind of drunk that went to hospitals, that got arrested. For us, it was the day-to-day insanity of alcoholism. And every day it gets a little worse, and you get a little crazier, and I didn't know what the problem was. And I started trying, as I said, solve the problem. I thought it was the house, and that didn't work, of course. And he told me if he only had a Mercedes, he wouldn't have to drink. So, I mean, I can look back and laugh now, but I really believed it. So we bought a Mercedes. Sean likes classic cars, and he always talked about this classic Mercedes. It wasn't classic, it was just an old Mercedes is what it was. And it was always breaking down. We didn't have money for food, but we had money for this Mercedes, you know. Well, needless to say, he drank. He continued to drink. And when you're living with an alcoholic, somebody has to bring the money home. Never occurred to me that he should work. Never entered my head. So I was trained to do nothing. I really was. Dance was my escape and my obsession, and that's what I had been trained to do, and I couldn't do anything else. And there was not much work for dancers in Los Angeles, and we needed money badly. So I took a real quick course, I think 2 weeks, because I never finished the course, in typing and shorthand. And I went looking for a job. And if people gave me a test, typing test or something, they never hired me because they knew I couldn't do anything. But there were those poor unfortunates who didn't give me a test and hired me. And, I could get the look together and talk the talk, and I could sell them. And, desperation starts setting in. You need money, and you'll do anything to start getting money. And so I couldn't type at all. I mean, I'd sit behind that typewriter, and my hands would go like this, and I'd get these pains. And my shorthand, it was scribble, and I would come home that night and Sean up to this house, this dark house. The only heat was the fireplace, and we used to sit against this fireplace, and Sean would pour himself a big glass of wine, and we'd go over my notes. And he rewrote the the letters. He did a much better job than my bosses did, And when I didn't know how to file something, I simply threw it away. Because at this point, you see, my mind is very busy. My mind is at home wondering what he's doing. If he was getting drunk, how drunk was he getting? What was he getting into? So my mind was there. It was never at work. And, for me to even begin to remember where I'd filed something was impossible. So it was just easier to say I never received it. And that kind of behavior doesn't last too long in an office. And after a short period of time, I'd be called in. And they said, Bonnie, I'm afraid this is just not working out. We're going to have to let you go. And then I did something. I used to cry and beg and plead to keep that job. I used to borrow money from people at work for gas to get to work. We had no money at all. Sean went to work every day. He never made any money, but he did go to work. I never could understand that. But anyway, every time that happened, I lost a little of my self-worth, a little more of my dignity, humiliated myself a little more. And I would go home and tell Sean what happened, and he would pull out the LA Times want ads and circle other jobs for me to go on interviews for. And that's the way it was. And I lost count of how many jobs I had. And I can look back now and laugh. It was one of the most desperate times for me. And it happened over and over and over again. And it was real insanity. Now when I told my mother I was marrying Sean, she was very upset. Number one, he was Irish. That was really bad. And she took me aside and she said, Bonnie, he's nothing but a drunk and a con artist. I later found out she was right, But because she said that, I had to cut off all ties of communication with her. I talked to his parents. I thought maybe they could do something with his drinking. I don't know why they could. His father was a drunk. I didn't know what his mother could do. But she couldn't do anything, so I had to cut her off. And I didn't have a higher power. I really did have my religion and God mixed up. And I thought if I couldn't practice my religion, then I don't have a God. And our lives just became the two of us and his drinking buddies that he would pick up and bring home in this house alone, getting crazier and more desperate and more hopeless day in and day out. And that's the way it was for us. And it got to be a very lonely, terrifying existence. I can't tell you the day I stopped making phone calls. When I got to this program, Sean made all my phone calls for me. And I didn't answer the door. And I learned a trick from my mother. It's just the way she handled things in her mature way. When we were outside in the garden or something and she didn't want to talk to the neighbors, she would just grab me by the collar and we'd hide in the bushes, I thought that's how you handle when you don't want to talk to somebody. You just hide. And that's what I did. Someone would come to the door, and I had a spot, I don't know if other Alans had a spot where nobody could see you from the doors or the windows, and you could just stoop down and hide until they left. And that's what our life was like, day in and day out. And the insanity with all of that is, the other things did not fix him. The job, the car, the house, the clothes. So then it became my fault, and I made his drinking my problem. And I knew it was because I did not love him enough. I was not a good enough wife. I was not bright enough. I wasn't educated enough. There was something wrong with me, and that is why he drank. And I always knew that I was a problem. Listen, he told me I was a problem. No matter when I confronted Sean about anything, which wasn't too often, they always have a way of turning it around, and I always end up apologizing. I don't know, it even happens today sometimes, you know. It is kind of baffling and powerful, you know. And I knew I was crazy, but we never had money for me. You know, if you had seen us when we got to this program, you would have said I was the one with the problem. Sean he always dressed well, you know. He always had to have the outfit and everything. And he was just always fine, because he was always just loaded, you know. And I was the one who never had money to get my hair done. I used to wear babushkas. In the first 6 months at Alanon, nobody thought I had any hair, you know. I wore babushkas, and I just wore these long shmatas, these long sort of muumuus. And I was real angry. God forbid if you were a checker at the grocery store. They're the ones that got my wrath, you know. I would never confront him. I was sarcastic. I would only confront him in front of other people and put him down in my wonderful sarcastic way. And as I said, that's what alcoholism was like for us. It just got more and more desperate, more and more lonely. One night we had a particularly awful fight with terrible things said to each other. Just terrible things. And it was one of those nights that I was up all night so upset, so distressed by the hateful things that had happened. And it never occurred to me how he could just go right to sleep, you know. It never occurred to me he passed out. I just thought he didn't care and went to sleep, you know. Anyway, he got up the next morning, and I was really frightened for the first time. For the first time, I believed it was more than just me, because he woke up and he was just fine. And I realized that he had no recollection of what had happened the night before, not a clue. And I became frightened because suddenly it was more than my just not loving him enough. Suddenly this was a problem much bigger than what I could handle. And I didn't know it was alcoholism. I really didn't. I always had it backwards. I always thought if I could solve the problems, then he wouldn't have to drink. And it never occurred to me that the drinking is what caused all the problems, you know. And it wasn't long after that awful night that I was down in Orange County, saving always helping somebody else. You know, whether they wanted my help or not, they got it. You know, I could just look them over and say, they need me, you know. I came back, and Sean told me he had joined Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was not too impressed. I mean, I had had many promises of stopping to drink. It became an annual anniversary present was one of them, you know. And the only thing I knew about Alcoholics Anonymous was from my mother. When things got really bad at home, she always threatened to send my father to the AA. And the AA's were the pits. I mean, if you got to the AA's, you have really scraped the bottom of the barrel, you know. And so I was not too impressed about him joining AA. And also, let me tell you, at this time, there was no Bonnie left anymore. His obsession was alcohol and drugs, and he was my obsession. If he came home and he was in a good mood, we were in a good mood. If he was in a bad mood, we were in a bad mood. If he got a ticket, we got a ticket. So when he joined AA, we joined AA, and my feeling is, what has he gotten me into now? Always something. And he went on, but you know, there was something different about him. He talked about AA, and these people had this look in their eyes, and I thought, God, it's a cult, you know, now what is it, you know? And he was talking about God, and oh my Lord. Anyway, and he said that there's a place for me to go to. And I was not too thrilled about that. But I was still at the point where help was still a magic word. He told me he had been arrested that week before, and that's what got him to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I am to this day very grateful that I was not in town, because I know I would have come to his rescue one more time. My higher power just removed me out of the city and allowed him to do what he had to do. And he got in some serious trouble, and I was not there to get him out. And anyway, I went to my first Alanon meeting to help him stay sober. And I loved it. I loved it from my very first meeting. Suddenly, I had all this feeling and this anxiety and this fear and this anger and this hatred. And, you know, I used to tell everybody about Sean, my work or whatever, and they would all say, why don't you just leave him, you know? And then, of course, I had to defend him, you know. But nobody said that to me in Alanon. They knew why I was there. And they were all sharing feelings that I had felt for years. And I had felt so alone in carrying this burden. And they were all sharing those feelings that I had. And I just felt, you know, I've always had my emotions mixed up, and I thought I loved it. And what I really did is I felt safe for the very first time. I felt the people really knew what I was going through. And they told me there was a solution. Couple interesting things they told me my first meeting that I was just glommed onto. Number one, they told me that alcoholism was a disease. I always thought he was out there making me crazy. He is out doing this to me. And they told me it was a disease. And I was powerless over it. That I couldn't keep him sober, and I couldn't make him drink, and I couldn't get him sober. And that was an enormous relief off my shoulders, just enormous. And they also told me that marriages made in sickness do not always survive health. They said, we can make no guarantees about your marriage. We can make no guarantees about him staying sober. But we can guarantee that if you keep coming back and work the steps, your life will get better. They told me misery is optional, and I hate that term, but it's true. Misery is optional. And I would like to tell you that Sean went to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I went to Alanon, and everything has been wonderful ever since. But that's just not life. It is just not life. The first year of Sean's sobriety, for me, was as bad, if not worse, than his last year of his drinking. He was impossible. He was a stranger to me. This is not my husband would, Sean, go in and just take over the party. And suddenly the only thing we really did socially was go to AA birthday parties or something. And he would go off in a corner, read a magazine, and eat all their food. And that became my next obsession, watching him eat. But he was a stranger. He was an absolute stranger, He was not the man I married at all. I didn't know if I liked him, to tell you the truth. I didn't know if I liked him sober. And anyway, they told me not to make any emotional decisions for my first 6 months. They told him for a year. And really, when I got to the program, I thought it's best we just go our separate ways. There had been so much damage, so many awful things done and said. I thought we were just beyond repair, that we should just go on. And a woman who later became my sponsor said, "My darling, who are you going to take with you when you leave?" And it was the hardest thing for me to accept that he was not my problem. My sponsor says anybody looks good next to a drunk. And that's true. I look great next to him, But you sober him up. He looked good real fast. And suddenly I looked a little crazy, And, that first year, I remember I felt so guilty having this feeling, and thank God for Al-Anon's. I wish sometimes that he would just take a drink to take the edge off of things. And I felt so guilty. I had prayed for sobriety. I wanted sobriety in my house, and now I'd wish he'd take a drink. And the Al-Anons told me that's okay. It's natural to feel like that, because when he was drinking, I had control, or what I thought was control. AA was taking that away, I asked him to make my phone calls, and he said, "No, Bonnie, I'm not going to do that for you anymore." I did not like that. He was not coming to me with all his problems. And it's not that I wanted the problems. I just thought if he told me everything, then I had control. In the drinking years, we had long conversations into the night. So many. We gave him a name. We called him Dawn Patrol. And we'd be up all hours of the night discussing the problems. He didn't remember any of them, the next day. But suddenly he was not telling me anything that was going on. And it was very scary. It was very scary. And one morning, I did everything. I had 3 jobs when I got to this program. And I did the cleaning and the shopping and the gardening and the painting and the plumbing. And I was his accountant, his nursemaid, his mother. I did everything, And they told me I had to stop doing that. And one morning he got up, he got dressed, he had breakfast, and he went to work without me. He did it all by himself. Now that sounds like something small to you, but I was devastated. I was devastated. And I really realized he was getting well. I realized if he didn't need me, then he would just leave. And AA was taking my needs of me away. And I realized my marriage was based on need. If I could not do for you, there would be no reason for him to stay. It never occurred to me that he would be there because he loved me, because he wanted to be with me, because he thought I was a swell person. None of those things. I thought if I can't do for him, then he's just going to pack up and leave. And I just had to walk through that fear one day at a time. And I later found out he had the same fear. He thought I would get well and say, "What am I doing with you?" and leave, And it was very scary. It was a real pulling apart time. And we've gone through many changes after that. I had to start looking at me. You know, when my husband was about a year sober, my sponsor said, she said, you know, alcoholism is not the only thing that took away his dignity. She said, you did too. You took over those responsibilities. You took away his dignity also. And she said, now I want you to start, it's time, you had a year sobriety, it's time for you to start giving some responsibilities back. And so I want you to think of something that you can turn over, and this was the catchword, totally. Now I thought my sponsor was a very busy lady. She had a newly sober husband at home. She had 3 kids who were going to Alanon, and she was driving all over the place. She sponsored a lot of people. She had a full-time job. I thought, this lady's just going to forget about this, you know. She'll forget about this little direction. Anyway, about 3 weeks went by, and she came up to me and said, Bonnie, have you thought of something that you're willing to turn over to Sean? And I said, yes. I have given it a lot of thought, and there's absolutely nothing that I trust him with. And that was true. I didn't trust him with anything. He said, no. She said, that's not going to work. There must be something that you'd be willing to turn over. She said, I want you to think of something and call me tomorrow. So I really thought about it, and I came up with one thing that I was sort of willing to turn over, and that was the laundry. I gave Sean the laundry to do. And it was just as I knew it would happen. You give them a responsibility, and they don't do it. You know, I knew that's what was happening. 2 weeks went by, and no laundry was done, and it was piling in the hot, blowing over the hamper, and now we are starting a mountain. And I would call my sponsor and say, see, you know, you turn it over, and they never do it. And my old pattern would be, I would take it back. He wasn't doing it my way or fast enough. 3 weeks went by, and I called her, and I said, he still hasn't done the laundry. And she said, if I have to give you more money for towels and sheets, I will do that. But don't you dare touch that laundry. On the 4th week, when there was nothing anywhere clean, he did the laundry, and it came out awful, as I knew it would. But it made an enormous change in our relationship out of something that small. It was the first time I gave my husband the dignity to do something in his own way, in his own time. I gave him some of his self-respect back. It was the first time I was ever consistent. I had never been consistent with anything. And he started respecting me a little more. There was no respect when we got to this program. And something as small as the laundry changed the whole level of our marriage. And if I waited till I understood the directions I was given in Alanon, I would still be waiting, because things they told me, the laundry thing just didn't make any sense to me, but it was really a great turning point for us. And that's how we started trusting each other. It started with that. And we started growing, and I got a job where I didn't have to type or take shorthand. And we finally got off that hill and into another house. We started looking for a house, and I only had one requirement, too. It had to have a foundation and sun. It had to be sunny. And, we had seen this house. We came back from a convention one day, and 2 houses down the street from our sponsor, we were dropping them off. There was this house for sale. And we went and looked at the house, and I just loved it. I just loved it. It was just wonderful and sunny, and it's in the flats. And Sean made an offer on it, and there were 4 other offers on it. And I thought, forget it. It's not supposed to be. And a couple months went by, and I still saw the sign up. So I called Sean and said, that house is still for sale. So he called, and that morning, all 4 offers had fallen through. We knew exactly what the buyers wanted. We made the offer. He made the offer, and he got the house. And I came home, and he told me we had the house. And I got so upset, I turned around, went back down the hill to my sponsor's house. And she said, what's the matter with you? You've got the house. And I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified of any kind of change. I was more comfortable in that house, miserable as it was, than taking a change. And we moved in this house, and the fear also was, I better not make a mistake now. I've got to be perfect now, or God is going to take this away. And I realized I had to really work on my relationship with a higher power. He was still a God of fear for me. I thought if I didn't behave It's going to be taken away. And we're still in that house today, and nobody's ever been drunk in that house. And it's terrific. It's terrific. We've had wonderful benefits of this program. Things got better and better, and around 5 years of sobriety was a changing point for us too. I came home from one of my meetings, and Sean was in the kitchen, and he had told me that he just got arrested. And like Mary, I thought, this does not happen in sobriety. And he told me what had happened. And just going to meetings and doing what you're told and showing up and working the program the best I can. Sometimes you don't know you change until something happens and you handle it differently. I was able to look at him and say, I'm sorry you have to hurt yourself so much. Compassion, I don't know. I heard compassion and serenity at meetings, and they seemed so far-fetched, so beyond my scope that I'd never get it, and here I felt it. And I was able not to say, as I would have probably a few years before, what are you doing to me now? Why are you blowing up our marriage? Why are you ruining our lives? I didn't feel that at all. I could see the real pain that he was in. And I told him that I wanted to stay married to him through this, but I only had 2 specifications that I needed for a marriage. I would have liked to give him a list on how to shape up, but my sponsor said you can't do that. You have to accept the whole person. You have to love the whole person. But I was told I could ask for fidelity and loyalty. And I asked for that, and I said if he can meet those requirements, I would be glad to be his wife. And if he couldn't, I understood, and I would have to go on. And as I said, I don't know where those words came from, other than rooms like this and the sharing. And I'm very grateful for crises like that, not when I'm in the middle of them, when I walk through the other side. Because had that not happened, I don't believe we would be married today. We had a lot of problems that came to the surface that he needed to work on, and so did I. And I'm very grateful for it today. And also I'm grateful that I followed the suggestions in Alanon. I always wanted a quick fix. If there was a problem, I fixed it immediately. And my solutions were always worse than my problems. But I was able this time to walk through it, to walk through the feeling, to walk through the fear, to walk through not knowing what the results would be, and turning it over, and it works. It really works. Today we have a terrific life. When Sean was 8 years sober, we decided that fear of change was no longer a reason not to have children. And I had never wanted children. I thought they were a pain and a bother, and they are sometimes. And so we turned it over to our higher power. And in March of '82, we had a little girl born, Kate. And Sean was wonderful through the whole pregnancy thing. We did the whole Lamaze class, and he went with me. And they're all a variety of husbands there. Some hated being there, some loved being there, some were embarrassed being there. And Sean was really wonderful and really participating and very supportive. And at one point when we were doing the breathing exercises, and the nurse was going around to all the people, she came up to me and she said, "How are you so lucky to get a guy like him?" And I thought, yeah, had she only known him 8 years before, she'd have probably wondered where the hell I picked him up, And that's a miracle. That is a miracle of the program. And we have a terrific little girl, and Sean was there for the birth, and he gave her her first bath and cut her umbilical cord, and is really a participating part of our family. And I hated the change again. I always still get afraid of change. It's not as bad as it used to be, and it doesn't last as long. But I still would like to tell you I am a pillar of faith here, but I am not. Sometimes I wake up and I don't remember there's even a higher power. Some days are just some days. But anyway, I didn't know if I could be a mother. I didn't know if I had what it took to be a mother. I didn't know if I wanted to change in my career, all of these things. And it's really just turning it over, and it's been one of the best decisions we've ever made. And she is a real fringe benefit of this program, a real fringe benefit. And she is practicing and participating in our recovery. And she doesn't have to participate in the illness, and I am so grateful for that. And she is around program people. And We have phones always ringing, people are in and out, and it's always loving and wonderful and warm people. And 2 years ago, on Christmas time, she was 2 years old, and on the television they were talking about Peter Lawford, and he had died, and they talked about him going to all these hospitals and recovery centers looking for help about alcoholism. And my 2-year-old looked at me and she said, "Mommy, they're talking about meetings." And I thought, if she's hearing alcoholism at 2, she's hearing all those other things we hear about higher power, loving unconditionally. Her definition of an alcoholic is somebody who goes to meetings, and that's nice. That wasn't my definition, I'll tell you that. I had a lot of other names for it. And she has been a real fringe benefit. It's hard for me to, separation is hard for me. She's my new obsession now. I mean, I just transferred one to another sometimes. And it's hard for me to leave her, It was hard for me to leave her this weekend when she was crying, and I just want to, it's going to be, releasing children is hard. I'm having a hard time now at 4 years of age. But Alanon, I didn't know any of these things. I didn't know how to be a mother, and I had no idea how to be a wife. And I had to learn a whole new way of loving. My way of loving is suffocating and taking over, and it's hard to love with an open hand. And that's what they taught me in Alanon. They told me I'm going to learn a new way of loving, a new way of a relationship. And today I have a marriage, and I have a life that is beyond what was possible. So anybody new, please don't write your script, because you are going to sell yourself so short. Our life today is a wonderful adventure. It really is. And we have had our problems, and we've had some financial problems the past few years. When I quit work, my first day home to wait the birth of our daughter, Sean came home to a place he had worked for 10 years. He went to work and he came home 15 minutes later. And I said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Our company went bankrupt." And I thought, this is a very inopportune time for this to happen. But you know what? You don't get angry at God anymore, because I do know a no just means a better yes. I knew something better was around the corner. I'd like to know when it's going to be around that corner. I like to have that security, but that doesn't happen. And we've been on a real roller coaster ride financially. And then we made a grievous mistake in the program. Something, again, I learned. We came to the rescue of people in the program. I thought we're not supposed to rescue them out there, and now I've learned we don't rescue them here either. And we lent some folks a large sum of money. And I made the mistake of not running it past somebody else, an objective member of the program. I thought my thinking was clear and straight. My motives were right. And it turned out to be a very big mistake. The people could not pay the loan. And I thought the worst thing is we'll go to the bank, get the house refinanced, and pay it off. I never thought the banks would say no to us. That was not in my plan. We went to 4 banks, and they all said no. And this note was due and payable. So we had to put our house on the market. And I had to accept that the worst thing that happens from this is that we sell our house, and so we move into an apartment, and that shouldn't be so bad either. And that's what I've learned in Alanon. They tell me to think about the worst thing that will happen, and then let go of it. And nothing was happening with the house. No offers were coming and nothing, and the money was getting due, and Sean was in and out of work, and I really got me. There's nothing like a crisis or problem to get you back into praying and meditating, and about 6 months later, I had an idea that I know didn't come from my higher power, that did come from my higher power, and I thought we should try the banks again. 6 months had gone by. He's been at his job a little longer, and so we went to this one bank, and there was a woman who was president there, and we told her what we needed. And other banks had said, well, we need your tax records, and we need this, and it's got to go to committee. I mean, this whole long thing. And she didn't say any of that. She said, well, I don't see any problem. And we went the next day, brought the necessary forms, and she signed the loan to us. Just like that. 2 weeks went by, and I was in the bank, and I thought, well, gee, I'll just say hi to her and thank her. And she was so nice and friendly. And I asked for her, and the people at the bank told me that she was no longer there. I really think God probably got dressed up in drag and came and worked at that bank. Now, that That is not a coincidence. That is not a coincidence. God is working in my life. He is working in my life. And that problem got solved, but I said it was an interesting lesson of not coming to the aid of people in this program. And, we have a nice relationship today. I have a nice relationship with my mom, who we never got along with for years. When I married him, they disowned me. My father threatened to shoot him. And today I have a really nice relationship with her. She's even going to a few Alanon meetings every now and then. And it's a real fringe benefit. I didn't work on my relationship, and I really want to stress that. It makes me crazy when people come to Alanon to work on their marriage. Because I didn't go to Alanon to work on my marriage. They told me to come to Alanon and work on me, and my marriage would take care of itself. And that was so foreign. That was such a foreign concept. I thought, how could that possibly happen? But it does. If I work on myself. And as I said, it was not so easy to blame Sean for anything anymore. I had to look at my participation. That awful house on the hill that we lived in, I blame Sean totally for that. It must have been a few years on the program where I was still carrying around this resentment. And my sponsor said to me, didn't you have to sign your name on that paper? And I totally forgot about that. Totally forgot. My participation in the disease. I was right there doing it with him. And so he's not totally at fault. I was there too. And I guess the life we have today is such a miracle. My marriage is a miracle and a fringe benefit. My daughter is a miracle. But the main thing that Alanon promised me is true, is I know who I am. I know who Bonnie is today, and I am okay. I'm not as terrific as I thought I was, and I'm not as awful as I thought I was. I find I'm just normal. It's okay for me to make a mistake today. I used to be so afraid of making mistakes, because if I did something wrong, then you would totally throw me away. I thought if I wasn't perfect, that I was worthless. And that's a hard concept. It's still hard for me today, of people-pleasing and my insecurity. But Alanons have loved me, and they've made me strong. And I love this program. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I think they've done a great job with him. It had nothing to do with me. He's turned out to be a terrific husband. And for that I'm grateful. And Alanon, I said, has taught me everything else. I'm learning from our little girl, who is the main thing. She went to a preteen meeting. She sort of hangs out with all the kids because they're all her friends, and she was at a meeting, and there was a new little preteen there. And she said he was throwing food around and hitting people, and she said, he doesn't work a very good program at all. So, we both come from a long line of alcoholism. It's in Sean's family, it's in my family, and I figure our daughter will either be one or marry one, I guess she's got a 50-50 chance, but hopefully she won't have to go as far and have to get as crazy. But I know she's going to have to do what she has to do, and thank God I've got all of you. And I am very grateful to be here. It's a wonderful convention. I feel so at home and so loved. And your Texas hospitality does equal our Southern hospitality, if not more so. Thank you very much.